The emergency klaxons shrieked through Research Station Omega-9, like banshees announcing the end of the world. Commander Vexti's razor-sharp claws scraped frantically against the emergency console, leaving deep gouges in the metal as sparks flew around her trembling fingers. The acrid smell of burning circuits mixed with something far worse than metallic stench of spilled blood, green blood. Lots of it. The viscous fluid painted abstract patterns of death across the pristine white. Walls of what had been, just hours ago, a peaceful research facility studying quantum crystalline structures. Now those same walls told a different story, one written in the language of violence and terror. Vexti's compound eyes darted between the multiple security feeds, each one showing scenes that would haunt her dreams forever. If she lived long, enough to have dreams again. Emergency transmission to Galactic Command? Her voice cracked as she screamed into the communications array. Her normally composed demeanor shattered like glass under pressure. The universal translator struggled to convey the raw panic in her tone. "This is Research Station Omega-9. You're under attack by Krillian death squads." The words hung in the static-filled air like a death sentence. Everyone in the galaxy knew what Krillian death squads meant. No survivors, no mercy, no hope. Another explosion rocked the station. Vexti watched in horror as the medical bay where Dr. Yithka had been treating wounded. Civilians erupted in a ball of superheated plasma. The blast door, designed to withstand meteor impacts, crumpled like paper under the assault. Through the smoke and debris, she could see movement. Dark reptilian shapes advancing with the methodical precision of apex predators. "They've breached sections 4 through 7, she continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "We have children, here civilians, research staff who've never even seen a weapon." The response from Galactic Command crackled through the damaged speakers, distorted by interference and distance. "Omega-9, we copy your distress. Nearest Allied forces are the Valerian 3rd Fleet. ETA is 6 standard days. Can you maintain defensive positions until then? 6 days?" Vexti's blood turned to ice in her veins. She looked at the tactical display showing red warning indicators spreading like a plague across the station's schematic. Sections 1 through 3 were already dark, not damaged, but silent. The kind of silence that meant everyone inside was dead. Negative. Negative. She shrieked, pounding her fist against the console. "We need help now. We can't hold for 6 hours, let alone 6 days. These are Krillians. They don't take prisoners." As if summoned by her words, the sound of plasma claws cutting through reinforced steel echoed from somewhere uncomfortably close. The Krillians were methodical in their slaughter, taking their time to savor the hunt. It was both their greatest strength and their most terrifying trait. They enjoyed the fear almost as much as the killing. "Please," Vexti's voice broke completely. "Anyone? We have children here." The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Static filled the comm channel, punctuated by the distant sounds of screaming and the wet, tearing noises that came when Krillian claws found flesh. Vexti closed her eyes, preparing to send a final message to her mate on the homeworld, when something impossible happened. Omega-9... The communications officer's voice was uncertain, confused. There's an unknown vessel responding to your distress call. They're not in our database. Ship designation reads as USS Retribution, Terran Colonial Marines." Terrans. The word meant nothing to her. In all her years studying galactic civilizations, she'd never encountered that species' name. Were they some backwater race she'd never heard of? Some mercenary group with delusions of military grandeur? Did it even matter at this point? "I don't care if they're space demons summoned from the void itself," Vexti snarled, her fear transforming into desperate rage. "Tell them to hurry." A new voice suddenly cut through the static like a laser through. Darkness, cold, professional, absolutely terrifying in its calm certainty. "Omega-9. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Colonial Marines, reading your situation. 30 minutes to tactical insertion. Hold your position." The voice carried an authority that made Vexti's spine straighten involuntarily. This wasn't some rookie captain making promises he couldn't keep. This was the voice of someone who had seen death before and wasn't impressed by it. But 30 minutes? She looked at the tactical display again. The red zones were expanding faster now, creeping toward the command center like spilled blood seeking. The lowest point? Could they really last 30 more minutes against the galaxy's most feared predators? Through the shattered viewport that overlooked the station's main docking bay, something caught her eye. A distortion in space itself, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Then reality seemed to tear open, and something emerged that made her question everything she thought she knew about warfare. The ship was massive, easily twice the size of a standard galactic cruiser, but that wasn't what made her stumble backward in shock. It was the design. Where galactic ships were elegant curves and flowing lines designed for efficiency and beauty, this vessel looked like it had been forged in the heart of a dying star by angry gods, black as the void between stars. Bristling with weapons that defied conventional tactical doctrine, the USS Retribution dropped out of hyperspace like a predator, emerging from the depths of some cosmic ocean. Angular, brutal, and absolutely unapologetic in its function as an instrument of destruction. This wasn't just a ship. This was a declaration of war. As Vextai stared at the impossible vessel, one thought echoed through her terrified mind. What kind of species built something like that? And more importantly, were these mysterious Terrans coming to save them? Or had she just invited something even worse than the Krillians into her nightmare? The answer was coming in 30 minutes. Captain Jake Morrison stood motionless on the bridge of the USS Retribution, steel-gray eyes reflecting the hellish glow of the tactical display. 23 years of military service had taught him to read destruction like other men read newspapers, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Research Station Omeganine wasn't just under attack. It was being systematically dismantled by creatures that turned killing into an art form. The holographic display rotated slowly, revealing hull breaches that looked like massive bite marks torn from the station's superstructure. Fires burned in sections that should have been vacuum sealed, their unnatural persistence suggesting something far worse than conventional weapons. Batazor, what remained of them, drifted past the viewport like grotesque confetti, their alien forms twisted into shapes that defied anatomy. Sir Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez called from the sensor station, her normally steady voice betraying the slightest tremor. She was young, barely 25, but she'd earned her stripes in the Centauri. Conflict. If something rattled Rodriguez, it was worth paying attention to. I'm reading 300 Krillian assault troops on that station. Heavy weapons, powered armor, full battle configuration. Morrison's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The Krillians weren't just another hostile species, they were the galactic equivalent of living nightmares. 8-foot-tall reptilian killing machines with natural armor plating, razor-sharp claws that could slice through reinforced steel, and acid blood that dissolved anything foolish enough to wound them.
Ow.
In 3,000 years of recorded galactic history, no military force had ever defeated Krillians in ground combat. Ever. What's our force strength? Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer would make any sane commander turn around and call for backup. 40 Marines, sir. Rodriguez paused, running the calculations again as if hoping the numbers would somehow improve. We're outnumbered 7-1. 7-2-1. Against creatures that had conquered 17 star systems without suffering a single tactical defeat. Any military academy would classify this as a suicide mission and recommend immediate withdrawal. Standard protocol demanded waiting for reinforcements, establishing orbital bombardment positions, maybe evacuating any survivors they could reach, but there was nothing standard about this situation. From his position near the weapons console, Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a mountain of a man whose scarred arms told stories of battles across half the galaxy, let out a low chuckle that sounded more like a predator's purr. The man stood 6'4" and weighed 240 pounds of pure muscle and barely contained violence. Sounds like fun, Captain. When do we drop? Morrison almost smiled. Almost. Thompson had been with him since the Mars Rebellion, and the sergeant's idea of fun usually involved explosions and enemy casualties. The man had once held off an entire platoon of separatist soldiers with nothing but a broken rifle, in what he called creative profanity. Marcus Morrison said, studying the tactical display with the intensity of a chess master planning his next move. Most people would call 300 Krillians overwhelming odds. Most people aren't Marines, sir, Thompson replied, his grin widening to reveal teeth that had been replaced after one too many bar fights. Besides, I've been getting soft lately. Could use some exercise. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the ship's systems and the occasional beep from monitoring stations. Every officer present understood the mathematics of the situation. 40 humans against 300 of the galaxy's most. Feared predators wasn't just unlikely, it was mathematically impossible. Morrison continued studying the display, his mind processing dozens of variables simultaneously. Normal protocol would be to wait for the Valerian Third Fleet, establish a perimeter, call in orbital strikes, maybe save whoever was left after 6 days of Krillian entertainment. But there were civilians down there, research scientists who'd never held a weapon, support staff with families waiting at home, and according to the distress call, children that changed everything. Prep for immediate combat drop, Morrison ordered, his voice cutting through the bridge chatter like a blade. Full assault configuration? I want every Marine locked and loaded in 10 minutes. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as officers began executing pre-combat procedures. Weapon systems hummed to life, drop pod mechanisms engaged with mechanical precision, and the ship's AI began calculating optimal insertion trajectories. The Retribution transformed from a vessel of exploration into an instrument of war. Sir Rodriguez's voice carried a hint of uncertainty that she tried desperately to hide. She'd read the same tactical reports as everyone else, studied the same battle analyses that proved Krillian invincibility. The Krillians have never been defeated in ground combat, ever. Their combat records show. Morrison turned to face her, and for a moment his expression softened. He remembered being young, believing that statistics and probability determined the outcome of battles. Experience had taught him otherwise. Lieutenant, he said quietly, do you know why Earth never appears in any galactic military databases? Rodriguez shook her head, confused by the apparent change of subject. Because every species that's ever attacked us is extinct. Smile was colder than the vacuum of deep space, carrying promises that made hardened veterans take involuntary steps backward. The Krillians think they're apex predators. They've conquered 17 worlds, slaughtered millions, and never faced a single defeat. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the bridge crew. But they've never fought humans. Morrison activated the ship-wide communications system, his voice echoing through every corridor, every compartment, every space where Marines were checking their weapons and preparing for battle. Marines, we've got hostiles holding civilians. 300 Krillian assault troops think they own that station. They think they're the scariest things in the galaxy. His voice dropped to a growl that would have made a Krillian warrior reconsider. It's life choices. It's time to show them they're wrong. Through the bridge viewport, Research Station Omeganine continued its death spiral. Fires still burning in the impossible vacuum, bodies still drifting like broken dolls. In 30 minutes, 40 humans would drop into that nightmare and face odds that no military force in galactic history had ever overcome. The question wasn't whether they could win. The question was whether anything would be left of the Krillians to tell the story. The drop pods screamed through space like bullets fired from the hand of an angry god, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they punched through the station's outer hull. The impact sent shockwaves through Research Station Omeganine's superstructure, rattling bulkheads and shattering what few intact windows remained. To the Krillian warriors stalking through the corridors, it sounded like the universe itself was cracking apart, which, in a way, it was. The first pod embedded itself in Corridor 7 with the subtlety of a meteor strike, its reinforced nose. Cone buried 3 feet deep in what had once been a pristine research facility wall. Steam hissed from the pod's cooling systems as hydraulic mechanisms engaged with mechanical precision. The Krillians in the immediate area turned toward the new arrival with the casual interest of apex predators. Investigating an unusual sound, they had no concept of what was about to emerge. War leader Kethper scarred veteran of 14 planetary conquests, tilted his massive reptilian head with mild curiosity. In his 3 centuries of existence, he had seen every type of military response the galaxy could offer. Desperate last stands, heroic charges, cowardly retreats, all ending the same way. With Krillian victory and alien corpses, the pod cracked open like an egg, releasing a hiss of pressurized atmosphere that carried something else, something that made Kethfer's predatory instincts suddenly scream warnings his conscious mind couldn't understand. What emerged made every Krillian warrior in the corridor take an involuntary step backward, something that had never happened in their species' 3,000-year military history. Not once, not ever. The figure rising from the drop pod moved like liquid death given form. Black armor absorbed the corridor's emergency lighting, creating a void-dark silhouette that seemed to swallow illumination itself. The weapon in its hands hummed with barely contained violence, its design speaking of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing staff. Sergeant Lisa Parker stepped onto the station deck with the confident stride of someone who had been born for this moment. She's 28 years old, 5'6", and exactly 140 pounds of pure human determination. She had graduated from the Detroit public school system, survived 3 tours in the outer colonies, and possessed the kind of quiet competence that made career Marines nervous. Her assault rifle was already spitting armor-piercing rounds before her boots fully touched the floor. The first Krillian warrior, easily twice her size and covered in natural armor plating that could deflect plasma bolts charged with claws, extended in the traditional killing strike that had ended thousands of lives across the galaxy. The creature moved with reptilian grace, its 8-foot frame cutting through the air like a living weapon. Parker didn't dodge. She didn't retreat. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she did something no Krillian had ever encountered in centuries of conquest. She stepped into the attack. Her left hand shot out with serpentine speed, catching the creature's descending arm mid-swipe. The wet snap of breaking bone echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. The Krillian's roar of pain and rage transformed into something else, something that sounded suspiciously like confusion. How was this tiny creature strong enough to break Krillian bone? Parker spun the massive warrior around with casual efficiency, her movements economical and precise. Another wet snap, this time from the creature's neck vertebrae. An 8 feet of unstoppable killing machine collapsed to the deck like a discarded toy. Contact front. She barked into her cum system, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just solved a math problem rather than killed a galactic boogeyman. Hostiles are bigger than intel suggested, but their bones break just fine. Her morpods were cracking open, releasing Marines who moved with the fluid coordination of a pack that had hunted together for years. Each emergence revealed another nightmare from the Krillian perspective creatures that should have been easy prey but moved like they were born for violence. Corporal David Chen rolled out of his pod like he was stepping off a city bus, his combat knife already in motion. The 26-year-old former auto mechanic from Phoenix had the kind of steady hands that came from years of precision work and the kind of attitude that came from growing up in neighborhoods where weakness was a luxury you couldn't afford. Group of 3 Krillians moved to flank him, their reptilian minds calculating angles of attack with predatory intelligence. They had done this thousands of times before, surrounded, overwhelmed, slaughtered. It was practically choreographed. Chen moved through them like they were training dummies. His combat knife found gaps in their armor with surgical precision, slipping between plates that should have been impenetrable, finding nerve clusters and vital organs with the expertise of someone who understood anatomy as both science and art. His sidearm fired continuously from his offhand, each shot perfectly placed, each round finding its mark with mechanical efficiency. The first Krillian dropped with a gurgling sound that was cut short by Chen's blade finding its throat. The second managed half a swipe before discovering that human reflexes operated on a different timeline entirely. The third actually landed a Hitchrazor claws raking across Chen's armor before. Learning that human armor was designed by a species that took personal protection very seriously, note to self, Chen muttered into his cum as he retrieved his knife from the final Krillian skull. Next time intel says, razor-sharp claws, maybe bring thicker gloves. But it wasn't the individual victories that shattered Krillian confidence. It was the pattern. Every pod that opened revealed the same impossible scenario. Creatures that should have been prey, moving like apex predators. Small beings defeating large ones. Prey species displaying predator behavior. For the first time in their warrior culture's history, the Krillians began to experience something their language had no word for, because they had never needed one. Terra war leader Kethver watched his warriors, veterans of countless conquests, killers who had slaughtered their way across 17 star systems, begin to hesitate, begin to doubt, begin to fear. What kind of species produced soldiers like this? What kind of world-forged beings that treated Krillian warriors like training exercises? As more pods opened and more humans emerged, each one moving with that same terrifying competence, Kethver realized something that would haunt his species' military doctrine forever. They weren't fighting another prey species. They had somehow stumbled into a confrontation with something far worse than themselves, and for the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, Krillian warriors were beginning to understand what it felt like to be hunted. Commander Vextay pressed her back against the reinforced walls of the command center. Her four arms wrapped protectively around the data cores that contained decades of research. Round her, the last remnants of her scientific staff huddled. In terrified silence, 12 brilliant minds, reduced to whimpering survivors waiting for death to find them. The battle sounds had been growing closer for what felt like hours, but something fundamental had changed in the symphony of violence. Echoing through the station's corridors, at first, it had been the familiar audio signature of Krillian domination, the bone-chilling war cries that announced another world's defeat. The wet tearing sounds that followed their razor claws finding flesh, the final screams of civilizations meeting their end. But now the sounds were all wrong. The Krillian war cries were transforming into something Vextay had never heard before in 3 decades of studying galactic conflicts. Screams of pain, screams of fear. The raw, primal vocalizations of apex predators, discovering they were no longer at the top of the food chain. Commander, Communications Officer Thesis whispered, her normally steady voice reduced to a terrified rasp. The young officer's hands trembled as she adjusted her equipment, trying to make sense of the audio chaos flooding the station's communication systems. And picking up transmissions from the Terrans. Vextay's compound eyes focused on the communication console as alien voices filled the command center with their casual, almost conversational battle chatter. Marine 2 to Marine 6. I've got 3 uglies pinned down in Corridor C7. Think you can swing around and flank these guys? Copy that too. Already moving through the ventilation system. Should have them in sight in 30 seconds. Marine for here. Quick question for everyone. Anyone else notice these things bleed acid? Just had to ditch my gloves after that last. Takedown gear requisition is going to love that report. Quit your complaining for. At least they die when you shoot them. Remember those crystalline things on Vega Prime? Those took 3 clips each. The casual tone sent ice-cold terror racing down Vextay's spine. These Terrans weren't just fighting the galaxy's most feared predators. They were having a conversation about it. Like her research team might discuss lunch plans or equipment maintenance, the complete absence of fear or even elevated stress, and their voices suggested something that defied everything she understood about warfare. What kind of species treated combat against Krillian death squads like routine office work? Suddenly, the blast door protecting the command center 3 feet of reinforced titanium composite designed to withstand direct plasm cannon hits inward with a sound like thunder trapped in a metal box. Fragments of what had been impenetrable security scattered across the floor like confetti. Through the smoking ruins stumbled a sight that would haunt Vextay's dreams for the rest of her life. A massive Krillian warrior, easily 9 feet tall, and built like a walking tank, staggered into the command center. Acid blood bright green and hissing where it touched metal streamed from dozens of wounds across his armored hide. His reptilian features were twisted with something Vextay had never seen on a Krillian face before. Desperate. Overwhelming panic behind the wounded giant came something far more terrifying in its calm composure. Captain, Jake Morrison stepped through the destroyed doorway with the patient, unhurried stride of an apex predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. His black armor showed signs of combat scorch marks, acid burns, impact craters, but he moved like someone taking an evening stroll rather than someone who had just fought through 300 of the galaxy's most dangerous killers, the wounded. Krillian spun around with the desperation of a cornered animal. His razor-sharp claws extended in what every military analyst would recognize as the species' final killing striker, last resort attack that had claimed thousands of lives across 17 conquered worlds. Morrison didn't even bother raising his rifle. Instead, he did something that redefined Vextai's understanding of physics, biology, and the fundamental nature of predator-prey relationships. As the massive creature charged, Morrison simply stepped aside with casual precision. His movement so economical it seemed almost lazy. His hands shot out with serpentine speed, catching the Krillian's head in what looked like a gentle embrace. Then he twisted. The crack of breaking vertebrae echoed through the command center like a gunshot, sharp and final. 9 feet of unstoppable killing machine collapsed to the deck with all the ceremony of a tree falling in an empty forest. Sector 7 secured, Morrison reported into his comm system, his voice carrying the same emotional weight as someone ordering coffee. All hostiles neutralized. Beginning civilian extraction procedures. Vextai stared at him in shock, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed.
Ow.
Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. All of them? Ah! But there were 300 Krillian assault troops. 300. It's the same force that conquered the hegemony worlds, that destroyed the Altarian defense fleet. Morrison's smile was sharp as a military-grade combat knife and twice as dangerous. He holstered his sidearm with movements that spoke of decades of practice, each gesture smooth and professional. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but you have to understand something about where we come from. He gestured casually toward the dead Krillian, as if it were merely an inconvenience rather than a creature that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. We are from Earth. It's what you might call a death world. Every single day is a fight for survival against something that wants to kill you. The weather, the predators, the diseases, sometimes even the plants. Morrison paused, his steel gray eyes scanning the command center with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen too many battlefields to count. 300 hostiles isn't a battle, Commander. For a Terran Marine unit, that's what we call target practice. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of his Marines conducting what they probably considered routine cleanup operations. No celebration, no relief. Just the professional efficiency of soldiers finishing a job, Vextai realized. She was witnessing something that would change galactic warfare forever, the moment when Earth announced its presence to the universe. And the announcement was written in Krillian blood across the corridors of Research Station Omeganine. But as she looked at Morrison's calm, confident expression, one question burned in her scientific mind. If 40 humans could do this, 300 Krillians, what would happen when the galaxy met the rest of Earth's military? The answer, she suspected, would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The silence that followed the battle was more terrifying than the violence that preceded it. Research Station Omeganine, which had echoed with screams and plasma fire just moments before, now carried only the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional clank of human boots on metal decking. The aftermath left the galaxy's military analysts completely speechless when they reviewed the combat footage. 300 elite Krillian assault troops, the exact same force composition that had conquered 17 inhabited worlds and slaughtered millions of sentient beings, had been eliminated in precisely 43 minutes by 40 human Marines. 0 human casualties. Not wounded. Not missing. 0. The mathematics alone defied every tactical doctrine in the galactic military database. Computer simulations run by the best strategists in known space had calculated the minimum force required to defeat 300 Krillians in defensive positions at roughly 2,000 troops, supported by orbital bombardment and acceptable casualty rates, approaching 60%. The humans had rewritten those calculations with extreme prejudice as the USS Retribution prepared for departure. its angular black hull reflecting the emergency lighting from the damaged station. Commander Vextai found herself, walking toward the airlock with steps that felt heavier than the station's artificial gravity could explain. Her scientific mind was still processing what she had witnessed, trying to reconcile observed reality with everything she thought she knew about warfare, biology, and the fundamental nature of predator species. Captain Morrison stood at the airlock entrance, his armor now showing the full extent of the battle acid burns that had eaten through layers of protective plating. Impact craters from plasma weapons, and scorch marks that told stories of violence her imagination couldn't fully grasp. Yet he moved with the same calm efficiency he had displayed throughout the entire engagement. As if what had just occurred was merely another day at the office. Vextai's forehands trembled as she offered the traditional Veltari salute of gratitude, a gesture reserved for those who had saved entire civilizations from extinction. Captain Morrison, before you depart, I must ask, ... Her voice caught slightly, the translator struggling to convey the mixture of awe and terror in her tone. What kind of world produces warriors like you? Morrison's expression grew distant, his steel-gray eyes focusing on something beyond the station's hull. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much to ever be truly comfortable with peace. Earth isn't like other planets in the galaxy, Commander. It's what xenobiologists would classify as a Class 12 death world. He paused, letting that designation sink in. 90% of everything on our planet actively wants to kill you. The weather systems can generate storms that level cities. The predators hunt in packs and think tactically. The diseases evolve faster than our medicine. Sometimes even the plants are carnivorous. Vex T's compound eyes widened. Class 12 death worlds, where theoretical constructs planets so hostile to life that most scientists believed complex civilization was impossible under such conditions. Humans aren't the biggest species on our world, Morrison continued, his voice growing harder with each word. We're not the strongest, or the fastest, or the most naturally armored. We don't have acid blood or razor claws or telepathic abilities. He turned to look directly at her, and she saw something in his expression that made her take an involuntary step backward. But we're the only ones left standing. Before Vextai could fully process the implications of that statement, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez stepped forward, her armor still smoking from acid burns that had eaten through the outer plating. The young officer moved with the same casual competence that all the humans displayed, as if surviving combat with Galactic-class predators was perfectly routine. Commander Rodriguez said, her tone carrying the kind of matter-of-fact authority that came from someone who had just solved a particularly challenging engineering problem. There's something you should understand about what happened here today. Vexti nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what came next. What you witnessed. We were being gentle. Rodriguez gestured toward the station where cleanup crews were still collecting Krillian remains. These hostiles were holding civilians, including children, so we used non-lethal takedown methods wherever possible. The words hit Vextai like a physical blow. Non-lethal? You broke their necks. You tore through their armor like it was paper. How was any of that non-lethal? Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Morrison, and both humans smiled with expressions that would have made Krillian war leaders reconsider their career choices. Exactly, Rodriguez replied with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics. To a child, broken necks are quick and clean. Minimal suffering. When we actually want to kill something, she gestured toward the weapons pod still mounted on her armor. We use explosives. The casual way she said it, like discussing lunch preferences, sent ice water through Vextai's circulatory system. These humans had just redefined restrained force in terms that would give military theorists nightmares for generations. As the Retribution began its departure sequence, its engines humming with barely contained power, Vextai rushed to the communication center with hands that shook so badly she could barely operate the controls. Her message to Galactic Command was marked with the highest priority classification. Available urgent. Species classification update required. Designation: humans, also known as Terrans. Origin: Class 12 Death World designated Earth. Military capability: extreme. Tactical assessment: single squad eliminated 300 Krillian. Assault troops in under 1 hour with 0 casualties. Recommendation: immediate diplomatic contact for alliance purposes. Under no circumstances should any military force engage these beings in combat. Repeat, do not engage. She attached the complete security footage from the battle, knowing that words alone could never convey the reality of what she had witnessed. The message reached Galactic Command within 6 hours. Within 12 hours, it had been forwarded to every major military installation in known space. Within 24 hours, it was being studied by strategic analysts, who initially assumed the footage was some kind of elaborate hoax, until the verification. Protocols confirmed everything was authentic. The age of human expansion had begun, though the galaxy didn't know it yet. Earth had just announced its presence to the universe in the most direct way possible, by demonstrating that 3,000 years of Krillian military dominance meant absolutely nothing to a species forged by a world that viewed survival as a daily examination, and somewhere in the depths of space, other hostile civilizations were about to learn a very important lesson about the difference between being apex predators on conquered worlds and meeting creatures that had earned their position at the top of the food chain on a planet. They tried to kill them every single day. The galaxy would never be the same. The end.